past year will probably go down as one of the most challenging in history for global business leaders. The All Africa Business Leader Awards, AABLA, wishes to acknowledge those individuals who've demonstrated truly exemplary leadership. I'm joined now in studio by Yunus Suleman. He's chairman for the AABLA Judges Panel. Thanks so much, Yunus, for joining us this afternoon. Well, you're chairman of the judging panel for the All Africa Business Leader Awards. What are the awards in recognition of? So let's start off there and why the decision was taken to actually go down this route.
Well, as you know, I mean, human nature is such, you want to be recognized. And I think for us, the All Africa Business Leadership Awards is about recognizing successful business men and women across Africa. And this is what it's about, showcasing the successful entrepreneurs and young leaders, as well as the women and men across the continent.
Of course, that nice incentive or motivation, for leaders to keep on doing what they're doing and to inspire as well. What's the criteria that displays truly exemplary leadership here? What are you looking out for?
Well, I think, as you said, it's an incentive. And I think the key thing is about corporate governance. You know, we know about the various challenges that happen throughout Africa. Besides corporate governance, I think it's about looking at successful businessmen, people who have displayed strong business management, innovation, and looking at their contribution to society at large. A key factor would be to sort of look for people that are role models in their different countries, and to really identify with those individuals, whereby it provides incentive for the younger generation to aspire to be as successful as these leaders that we will be recognizing.
What's interesting is that if you're going down into the categories, you've got the Africa Business Leader of the Year, and then you've got Africa Business Woman of the Year. Why that distinction made between the males and females within this category?
I think it's very important to recognize women. And what tends to happen historically is that women tend to get clouded because male tends to dominate the business environment. And that's one of the major reasons we felt it was important to separate the two awards. It was something that the judges toyed along for quite a while. And we felt, no, it would be really important to separate the two, where we actually can give special recognition to the woman. And I think that importantly from our perspective is that there's a huge number of successful women on the continent. And we need to give credit to that. I mean, on Friday night I was involved in a similar award ceremony, and in one of the categories, in the successful contribution to the business was the person's wife.
Yeah.
You know, and she played a fundamental role in being a backbone to that business. But the trouble is that the men are on the front line, and that's importantly to separate the two and make sure that the women do get recognition across the continent.
Of course, and building on for future recognition on, on the same kind of merit moving forward. Of course, we've got the Africa Young Business Leader of the Year as well. From the nominations received, what sense does it give you of the talent that's out there and the breed of future leaders that we're looking at on the continent?
There's huge talent out there. And I think when I look at Africa as a sort of continent, we've got to seek that talent. We've got to look for those young entrepreneurs. You know, I lived in Nigeria for a few years, and ultimately when I look at Nigeria, there's a significant amount of professionals out there, huge, businessmen, and importantly is that we've got to look for these young entrepreneurs. I don't think we've got the sort of level of, call it, publicity yet, and I look at that as a category which needs greater attention to look for those individuals that are highly successful. And the fact is that we're only looking for people below 40. We're saying young entrepreneurs are those below 40. But I think it's important that this being the inaugural year of the awards, that the more publicity we can give, the better. And for us to also use our networks to really identify those young entrepreneurs.
Have those nominations come through, that have come through, been a widespread and a good reflection of the continent and the talent that it boasts? Because we know that in the south you've got the South African economy that boasts that actually dominates. You've got Nigeria on the west coast and then Kenya in the east.
I was very pleased, and the judges as well, in terms of the actual spread of the nominations. We've had nominations from North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, as well as Southern Africa. And I think the important thing that we've recognized, it wasn't dominated by South Africa, which is important.
That important as well on the judging panel. And what's interesting is that we've got a panel of South African judges. Do you think that is a fair reflection of just what kind of judging process we're going to be looking at?
Well, it's a fair reflection, but I think what we tried to identify was judges from different parts of the continent. At least one individual was identified in the West African region, but he was not, let's say, available to commit his time. We identified someone from, there were probably 3 judges from outside South Africa. And I think it's more a question of, as we go forward, we'll have more, let's say, widespread judges. Even though Godfrey is living in South Africa, he's not really South African.
He's Zimbabwean at heart. That's so exactly it.
I think we'll be looking at much more widespread. But I think when it comes to identifying the winners, we will consult with people, even though they may not necessarily be part of the judging panel.
So take us through the process that you've been through so far. I mean, has it been tough battling out the short list and, those candidates from the wide range of nominations you've received?
I think it was quite a detailed review. In some of the categories, we've received a significant number of nominations. And to cut them down to, let's say, the number of finalists that we have, which is 3, it was quite intense discussions amongst the judges. And I think that was important. I think there was lots of, let's say, intense discussion based on the various criteria. I mean, we've got a long list of criteria. So we had to go through in the context of, is a person a pioneer? Is the person, has he planned or she's planned succession planning? In the context of capital, did they get family money? Because often you find businesses are successful because they've been there for lots of generations.
Yeah.
And in our case, we looked at that and said, well, has the person started off from scratch? Is he or she starting off from the grassroots and really growing the business based on his or her personal acumen?
Yeah.
And that's fundamental. So I think we really spent a fair amount of time going through a whole list of criteria by category. And that's contributed to us concluding unanimously on the final list, which was announced a few weeks ago.
One would assume that decision making becomes tougher as you progress through the categories. We've been through a few. There's also Africa Entrepreneur of the Year, but then there's the Lifetime Achievement Award as well. And one would assume that it's difficult to come to a decision specifically in that category, given that business has been around for more than a century in Africa.
Yeah, if you look at the process that we followed, after identifying the finalists, we now have started the interview process. So we're going through and interviewing all the candidates on the finalists. And in that process, it's what we call the smell test. Is you look at the person and say, well, you look great on paper, but tell us, what was the success factors? What contributed to you being where you are? And that's where the distinguishing factors come about. And in one of my previous, let's call it awards functions, I asked a person that was a close contender with the second individual in this category. I said, what is it that makes you tick? What do you do when you get up? What inspires you? And I think that the point that just swung it is when the guy said to me, every morning when I get up and I say to my wife, what can I do for someone today? That swung it. So when you look at the categories, especially the lifetime achievement, it's about what has a person done in his lifetime? And how has he contributed to the success of the business that he ran? And was it, based on his innovation or her innovation to get it to where it is? And whilst, we've got a fair number of, let's call it, candidates for the Lifetime Achievement Award as well, we would have to reach finality in that in the next few days as to now identifying the person that really excels amongst the rest.
Well, we wait with bated breath for the results of these awards. Thanks so much, Yunus, for sharing your time with us this afternoon. Of course, Yunus Suleman is chairman of the AABLA judging panel.